Well, hello there, my friends, and welcome back. My name is Stephanie Safarian, and you're listening to episode 563 of Sustainable Minimalists. This is a listener-supported show about intentional and eco-friendly minimalist living. And yes, it is listener-supported, which means you all are keeping it in existence. Thank you so much to my subscribers. This episode is for everybody, and we are discussing living off-grid, but in an incremental way today. So unplugging from society's systems. I'm talking about those public utilities like electric and water and sewer. That is stressful and overwhelming for an awful lot of us. So how can we take a step back, especially from the fossil fuels, and not move and not build a house in the mountains from the ground up? How can we just step back from our reliance on fossil fuels? That's really what we're talking about today. First part of today's conversation is about the importance of stepping back from fossil fuels and stepping into reclaiming our self-sufficient skills. That's part one. Then in part two, we're talking about making our existing homes a bit more off-grid, a bit more sufficient, self-sufficient. And we're talking specifically in part two about installing solar panels. Clean energy tax credits for solar panels are expiring on December 31st of this year. And that's quite unfortunate because clean energy tax credits made solar panels and other forms of clean energy accessible, financially accessible for many Americans, and they are disappearing. So is now the time to go incrementally off-grid by installing solar panels? My guest today is here to answer that question for all of us, myself included. My guest today is Ryan Mitchell. He is a proud off-gridder. He is also the author of a new book, which just came out, and it's so good. It's titled Living Off-Grid, 50 Steps to Unplug, Become Self-Sufficient, and Build the Homestead of Your Dreams. Ryan, I'm so excited to talk to you today. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on. I would love it if you started today by telling us about yourself. Who are you? What do you do? And how did you find yourself interested in saying goodbye to society's systems and
Yeah.
going off grid? Tell us all of it.
Yeah. So my name's Ryan Mitchell. I run the tinylifecom, and I'm the author of a new book called Living Off-Grid, 50 Steps to Unplug and Become Self-Sufficient and Build the Homestead of Your Dreams. And my journey started back in 2009 at the Great Recession. I had just graduated graduate school and was in my first job when the economy took the hit and I lost my job. And at the beginning of my career, it was a kind of a good point for me to think about, what do I want my career to look like? What do I want my life to look like? My finances, how I spend my time, and all those kinds of things. And so that's when I made a pivot and I built a tiny home, which was off grid, and started my own business so I could be remote in a time where remote work wasn't really a thing. And by living in a tiny home, I also was by de facto a minimalist and had to have very few possessions and just had to really think about, what do all these things, what role do they play in my life? And how do I want to navigate that world and society when it comes to consumerism and just the way that I move through the world? So that's how I got started and my background. The website focuses on simple living, and we have a couple different verticals there. One is tiny houses, obviously. Then we have minimalism, and then we have homesteading, off-grid living is the third one.
Well, you just wrote a book about living off grid, and I
Mhm.
want to talk to you about that because you can live in a tiny house that has electricity and is plugged into the sewage system, right? What is
Mhm.
it about living off grid that enticed you and continues to entice you?
Yeah. It was something that always interested me. I didn't know that if I was going to be able to actually pull it off. But when I built my tiny home, I was able to start from the ground up and just build a house that was designed to be off grid. Where I was, it was very expensive to get power and sewer and all those types of things to it. And I didn't own the land. I was on a friend's piece of land. So I didn't really want to sink a lot of resources and solar could have been more portable for me. So yeah, it just aligned with some of my personal views of the world and philosophy and values. And then I had the opportunity to make it come a reality. And then there was a lot of use and figuring out and sharing that journey as well. So that's what got me into it and why I started that.
And why have you stuck with it? I guess is
Yeah.
my next question. What benefits have you experienced firsthand? I've talked with other off-grid enthusiasts before, and they'll be the first to say, and you can either tell me they're right or wrong, but they'll be the first to say that living off-grid is more work, but it's more intentional, more engaging work, let's
Hmm.
say. And that's what keeps them off-grid. But what is it for you? What benefits?
Yeah, it definitely, there is a bit more ownership that you're taking over your kind of key things like your sewer, your water, your power, things like that. And it is more work at times, but then it's also less work at the same thing because like I didn't have a power bill. So I lived in my tiny house for a decade. And in that decade, I never had a power bill. And when I first set up the system, the power company wanted $15,000 to just run the lines out to where I was at, and I got my system for 14,000 and change, but there was a tax credit, 55% at that time. So I was like already ahead of the game when it came to money. Yes, it's more work, but then also you got to factor in, all right, you're going to be paying that power bill. How do you pay that power bill money? How do you get money? You work. And so I didn't have to do that. So for a decade, I didn't have a power bill. I didn't have a sewage bill or anything like that. So it was just like it it's can be very convenient at times and then also very inconvenient at other times. But I don't know. I found that I really liked it. It has its pros and cons for sure. There were times where my neighbors would text me. They're like, "Hey, can I come over and charge my phone?" And I was like, "What? Yeah, yeah, sure, but what's going on?" And like, "Oh, the power's been out for 2 days," or something like that. And I had no idea. I was just over here living my best life, cooking dinner and all this kind of stuff, and had no idea that, you know, the rest of the town had no power or whatever because I was just a little island. And then there was other times where it was cold and rainy in the middle of winter at 11 o'clock at night and my power went out because it'd been so cloudy for days. And I had to like start up a generator, and that was annoying. So pros and cons, but I think broadly it was a positive experience. It certainly saved me a lot of money in the end, and glad I did it. I think overall, definitely things I would do differently if I were to do it again, but overall good.
So it sounds like you get your electricity from solar panel. Is that
Hmm.
correct? Yeah.
Yep.
And I read in your book you have a compostable toilet situation going on.
Yeah, yeah.
What else is different for listeners who don't even know what an off-grid house would look like? Walk me through some of the other ways in which your home does things a little bit differently.
I'll start by first saying that when you're thinking about going off grid, what I encourage people to do is figure out what off grid is going to mean to you because we could adopt someone else's definition, but it may not be right for us. I don't get too dogmatic about, well, if you're connected to the internet, you're not off grid or something like that. So whatever's right for you is living off grid, and that can take many different forms. But the key thing is basically you taking back some of the ownership and self sufficiency over some of the key things that you rely on outside forces, entities, corporations for. And that typically is, like you said, power, water, sewer, food production, fixing your own stuff, canning your own food preservation, types of things like that. So the book, what I do is have some base chapters that everyone reads, and then the 50 steps is a lot of steps. But what I tell people is read the first part and then choose your own adventure for the things that matter for you later on. And there's going to be some things that don't appeal to you. Maybe you don't want to be getting into raising cattle or something like that. So maybe you buy your beef from a rancher and bring it to a butcher instead of having a whole cattle operation because you may not have time for that or have no interest in that, or you actually want to go on a vacation once in a while. Yeah, it can be a lot of different things, but it tends to focus around energy, water, sewage, and food production.
I really like your point there, which is it's a choose your own adventure situation.
Mhm.
It's not either live off grid or not. There are incremental steps in there. And I do want to talk especially about solar with you in a little bit,
Yeah.
because I think that a lot of my listeners, they're fascinated by 100% off grid living, but it's not going to happen anytime soon. However, they're likely interested in those incremental steps. Maybe they install solar panels. But just your point on self-sufficiency there. We live in a culture that is highly reliant on convenience.
Mm.
Convenience is, in my view, the opposite of self-sufficient living, because when we're pursuing convenience at all costs, more often than not, we're letting those self-sufficient skills fall to the wayside. All right, so walk me through the steps. So you built the tiny house, and
Mm.
then what was next?
Yeah, first I had to learn how to build a tiny house, which means I had to learn each step of a home build. So I did that, like building the airplane as I was flying and built the home. I worked with an electrician to do electrical, some of it at least, the big parts. But most of it, the rest of it I did on my own completely. Then from there, I moved into it and I got solar kind of set up alongside of that at that point. Then got water squared away, figured out the composting toilet thing because initially I was gonna get connected to the sewer. Then I got the quote for $55,000 to run the line. And I was like, maybe that's not in the cards. It was more than my house cost. And so that's when I started to turn to looking at composting toilets, which I think out of the whole experience, that was like my thing that I was least jazzed about. That's just, I don't know. It's very convenient. Speaking like convenience, it's very convenient to just press a little lever and all your problems just flush away down to some sewage processing center somewhere where you don't see it or smell it or anything like that. So that was a big thing that I had to do. And then at that point, my bills basically, I moved out of my apartment, finished up that lease, and my bills there were about 1,500 bucks for the rent, utilities, insurance, things like that. And then my new kind of what I call like monthly cost was about 15 bucks. And that was chipping in a little bit for taxes and some propane that I used. So yeah, 1,500 to $15 really changed the financial picture for me. And it meant that I didn't have to work as much. It allowed me to pursue my website has a full-time thing. And sitting on that porch, and I was like, oh, this is really weird because it's like, what now? And what I think was stood out to me in that moment was usually in life you have just a few options or like maybe one practical option. And I was sitting on that porch in these beautiful woods on this house that I just built. And I literally could do anything. It's like I had money in the bank. I had good income, more income than I had ever made before at that point. And my bills were also lower than they ever have been in my life. So I was making the most, spending the least, and had complete control over my time. And then I had to figure out what's next and what do I want my life to actually be like. I dreamed about it and thought about it, but it hit different when like you're sitting there, you're like, oh wow, like this really is happening. Like I can do anything. And that's almost it was a little daunting in that moment because I was like, if you can do anything, then what do you do? If you have complete control of your time, and I struggled with that for a little bit, honestly. But then I started to figure out some answers for myself. Tried a few things. Some things didn't work out or just weren't right for me or weren't as interesting to me as I thought they would be. Or you have the perception of like when people retire, they're like, I'm just going to sit on the beach and drink Mai Tais. You try that, you do that for 6 months, and okay, it's not quite the same as you thought it would be. So I had my own versions of experiences like that.
Well, what's interesting to me about your story, Ryan, is that usually in our capitalistic money first society, the bills dictate what our life looks like.
Yeah.
But for
Hmm.
you, it was the opposite. The bills didn't dictate your life because you intentionally did work on the front end to make the bills almost non-existent. So that opened up a lot of freedom for you, it sounds like.
Yeah, and that's like actually how I got to the tiny house. It wasn't like when I lost my job initially in the Great Recession that I was like, I want to live in a tiny house. What it was is I looked at my budget and I said, okay, what are the largest line items here? And housing was obviously the top one. And I said, crazy question. How could I just get rid of this bill? Like, what if I just didn't have this expense? And I didn't know how I was going to do that. I didn't know if it was even possible, but I knew that if I was able to solve for that, it would change the trajectory of my entire life and my financial future and just the way I work in the world. And like you said, the cheat code to escape the matrix that we call consumerism and capitalism.
Mm. I love that. That is just gold for my show. That is content gold. Thank you. So I want to transition a little bit and I want to talk about incremental off grid living because
Sure.
I think for a lot of my listeners, they are just so entrenched in paying the bills, like making a huge decision, a huge life pivot is not in the cards. And so it sounds to me like, let's say we don't want to sell our homes. Let's say we don't
Mhm.
want to build it from the ground up in the mountains. Let's say we want to just make our existing home slightly less reliant on the grid. I'm guessing that the way to do that would be solar panels. Do I have that right?
Yeah, I think when you start to think about how you could go off grid, what I suggest is look at the different options, and people tend to have a curiosity about one of them and lean into that. Some people, they're health conscious, they care about what they put in their bodies. So, food, it makes a lot of sense, and you can start a small garden. If you live in a city, you can do container gardening on your balcony. You could get a community garden plot. For other people, they're like, I think solar is just interesting. And so they could start with just learning a little bit about solar through a solar generator, which is you can get those for a couple hundred. They have them at Costco now, and you can just learn what that looks like and figure out, okay, so 100 amp hour battery. I don't even know what an amp hour is, but what I do know is I can run my laptop for X number of hours off of that size. And then you start to get these real world applications. There could be other things like make your own clothing, processing certain foods, canning, things like that. Maybe you set up like a rain barrel for your garden or something like that, just to learn about water capture instead of drilling a hole that's maybe tens of thousands of dollars or something like that. You can start these baby steps. I talk a little bit about that in the book. It's important, I think, for people to start where they're at and to start small. And there's this tendency that people want to do it all or nothing, or it has to be perfect. I have to have 100 acres in a rural location that's just gorgeous pasture, or one like these great woodland areas with a nice farmhouse or something like that. And that may be the goal, but it may not be possible today. So it's important, I think, to start today because you'll learn a lot along the way, and that will help you solidify and inform some of your decisions for what's next, and probably get you in a place that you'll be happier with in the end.
I like that answer. And it makes me think about how I never would have considered myself this way before you just said it. But yeah, I'm incrementally off grid. Like I started a garden, I taught myself how to can. We got a rainwater barrel. So just starting to learn these self sufficient skills is putting a toe in the moving away from the grid or the matrix, you called it, life, right? Learning how to
Yeah.
mend your clothes instead of just throwing them in the trash can. That's stepping away from the
Yeah.
matrix, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Another way that I've looked at it in the past is, okay, what are ways that I rely on the broader society as a whole. And that could be like things that I buy, the services that I use, the things that I can't produce on my own plot of land or my own home or something like that. And I just list those things out, and I'll choose one that kind of strikes me as a particular weakness or an over reliance or just something that like seems maybe a little tenuous, like during COVID with all the supply chain stuff that really was eye opening to a lot of people. Is what do you mean I can't have my favorite brand of cereal, right? Or this hand sanitizer is like a weird brand that I don't know if I'll like, or whatever the thing is. And so just you think about those things. Where am I reliant on those things? Maybe over reliant, and how can I take some of that control back? Or how could I be in a better position if something like that wasn't, or too expensive, right? Prices are going crazy right now. So what happens when eggs are too expensive? What if I had some chickens and said, "Oh, that's interesting. How much are chickens? Is that easy? What do they eat? Can I do that? My HOA or something like that, or my town, do they allow that?" So, yeah, you start to ask these questions, and it gets you to some interesting places.
Well, to that point, I think the thing that most of us are super reliant on and don't even realize it is electricity. Like
Yeah.
the electricity went out in my neighbor. First of all, the electricity goes out a lot in my neighborhood. That's neither
Mhm.
here nor there. But the electricity went out for 5 whole hours during the day, not at night
Mm.
when we were sleeping, but during the day. And my family, my children especially, even I'll be honest, even me, like, what do we do? Like, I can't use the oven. I'm bored with my book. We are all on edge, so a board game isn't fun at this moment.
Mm.
And so, to that point, and also to the point that clean energy tax credits are being sunsetted at the end of this year, I do want to talk to you before we say goodbye about solar panels. Here we are, where these credits, which are making solar panels affordable for countless Americans, they're disappearing. So it really is kind of a now or never moment. For listeners who are interested in going incrementally off grid by installing solar panels to perhaps not, it sounds like for you, the solar panels give you 100% of your electricity. For those of us in larger, or dare I even say oversized homes, the solar panels might not provide 100% electric coverage, but they will give some padding. Talk to me about solar panels. What should we be considering?
If you live in a traditional home, the traditional American home, I think, is around 2,700 square feet. And that kind of square footage just demands a certain size HVAC system, your heating and air. And that's 60-70% of the power that your home will use is the heating and cooling of it. But everything else is actually pretty approachable with a fairly basic set of solar panels. And if you're on grid, you don't even need batteries, because what you essentially do is it's a process called net metering, where you generate the power during peak times of sun. You sell it to the power company, usually at a rate that's much higher than what you could buy it for, because it's a green energy source. So they pay a premium for that. So in my area, they buy solar power for 21 cents, but we pay 11 cents. And so what I basically can do is, it's almost 2 to 1, is I can basically get a credit through the power company, use them almost like a battery, right? Like a virtual battery, but it's actually dollar based. And then when I do need power at night, or when my panels aren't producing enough, then I buy the power back at half the rate. Solar panels have come a really long way, and they're really affordable. It's about I think the going rate now is about $1 a watt installed. So that includes the labor, the panel, the wiring, you name it. And if you do the install yourself, then you can save even more. But that's quite a good deal when you think about it, because solar panels typically have a 20-year warranty on them, which means they're going to last a lot longer typically. So you'll definitely get that money back. The name of the game typically when it comes to people and solar is it's an economics game. Like people want to think about it from like a green perspective or having power when the power isn't there perspective. But a large driver of it is really economic. The whole industry is centered around that. So that's why panels are what they are because they had to get to a certain point. So I'm not too worried about the tax credits going away. I would certainly utilize them if they were available. But I think solar is now good enough that it can stand on its own with the money side also being possible if you have the initial cash to do it. That's usually the trick is you need to pay for it. Now there's certain programs where you like get a loan and then like you pay back the loan from the first bits of the power and things like that. And there's mixed feelings on that. And it really depends on the company you work with and all that. But if you're able to pay for them outright yourself, then you get the benefit right away and you'll see the return on investment. And it may take a while, to be honest, but it will be there because the numbers are there. The batteries are where it's really challenging right now. Even with the latest technology, batteries will do pretty well, but they're pretty expensive per watt. And they also have a much shorter shelf life than your typical panel would. So they're more expensive. They don't last as long. The economics are a little bit more challenging. That's why people go to the net metering strategy is because the numbers are there and maybe they have a smaller power bank just to get them through the power being out for 5 hours. It's not likely to run your HVAC, but it'll run your Wi-Fi. You can watch some TV. You can run a fan, that kind of stuff. So yeah, you can achieve quite a bit if you take some of these strategies into account and kind of employ them in a smart way. And then from there, you can expand your system. And that's what's nice about this is like if you plan it, maybe you don't do batteries right out of the gate, but you get an inverter and a charge controller that can support it. And then when you do have the money, you can add some batteries and you can add some more batteries. And there's some technical bits that you have to consider there, but you can use net metering to begin with and then build up your battery bank over time as like a fallback to the net metering.
That's all so helpful. So I thank you so much, Ryan. But this show is heavily rooted in environmentalism, and I
Mhm.
find myself feeling like the solution, at least on an individual level, my individual best practice is to step away from fossil fuels in all aspects that I'm able to. The car, the
Mhm.
electricity, which in my state is still majority powered by fossil fuels. So do you have anything to say on, stepping away from all of society's systems as a means of reducing our individual reliance on fossil fuels?
Yeah, the environmentalism angle to me had bearing on my decision when I went to solar. Like it was an expensive thing. Like I had to have, I think it was like $14,500 like on hand, one lump sum to pay. And I was like 23. So what 23-year-old had that kind of money? That was a big investment at that time for me. And I think for most people, but I needed it to power my house. So there was a practical bit, but there's also like a values based thing. It was like, okay, this is the type of thing that I want my dollars to go to versus a power company where most of the power in my area was actually coal. And so I was able to calculate basically that me going off grid meant that about 2 tons of coal per year was not burned. And I forget the amount of water, but it was quite significant too. So, that you could say that's doing my part, whatever. I think when you get into the nuances of fossil fuels and like what we need for power as a society, I think unfortunately, like we're gonna have a future where we need all of it. We need clean sources. We need less than clean sources. Let's just say that nuclear as well, just to kind of power everything because we're not in a place where we can just give up, let's just say, fossil fuels. And there's a certain practicality to it. Like I will cop to that I use propane to do my hot water and my stove. And that was a calculated decision, one that at first I was very resistant to. But then when I realized I was either going to be able to do solar or not because of it. And basically if I were to do those two things, I would have needed like probably another $30,000 in solar panels and batteries just to achieve that. And then you start to see, oh, okay, now I get it. That $10, $15 tank of propane has a lot of punch to it. And if I have really efficient systems, a tank of propane would last me about 3 months. And so I had a little bit more control over the usage of it. So yeah, like I think doing this life and going this way, you get to grapple with those things and you also see the impact, right? Like you hook up the tank, you see it burn, you understand these things at a more practical level, and you understand that it's like in life, everything's give and take. And so you understand, okay, these are the decisions that someone somewhere in society was making for me, but now I have to be the arbiter of those decisions, and I also have to face the reality of those things. It's if you only go to the store and buy meat that's a pretty package, ground beef, if you've ever had to, when I had chickens, I had to slaughter a few of them. And that was really eye-opening. Like I'm a meat eater. I eat meat almost every day, but it was very eye-opening and very sobering to butcher a chicken. And frankly, didn't like it. I still eat meat, but it was, very real. Like I had to face the reality of my decisions. And the same thing with off-grid of hooking up that propane tank. So I think it's just useful for you to understand those things.
Yeah. There's a couple degrees of separation. These systems, whether it's the industrial food system or whether it's the electrical grid or whatever system we're talking about, there's a couple degrees of separation from us with regard to what's actually happening to give us the electricity or give us the meat. And I appreciate your answer there, which essentially says getting rid of those degrees of separation and doing it yourself teaches you an awful lot.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Ryan, what a conversation. I have so much to think about and talk to my husband about. He's going to be so excited. Tell us where we can find your book. It's out now. And once again, it is titled Living Off-Grid, 50 Steps to Unplug, Become Self-Sufficient, and Build the Homestead of Your Dreams. Oh my gosh, 50 steps. Where can I find it?
Yeah, yeah. So like it's 50 steps. Like you said, the first few steps everyone will read, and then like the last 40-ish ones, you choose what piques your interest and what you want to pursue first. You'll pick and choose what's right for you. But the book is available at every single major retailer. We also have a large network of local bookstores too. So if you're looking for it there, we have it available in those stores. And then you can also go to my website, thetinylife.com. We have a store there, and we have a fulfillment thing that you buy it through that as well. Yeah. Anywhere the books are sold, you'll be able to at least order it, if not available right away. And I appreciate the time.
I'll also link to your site in this week's show notes. So listeners, you can just skip Amazon when you go to order it. Let's just skip that one right then and there.
Yep.
But Ryan, thank you so much. I really genuinely enjoyed our chat today. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Listeners, that's a wrap, my friends. Show notes are at mamaminimalist.com/563. I've linked to everything you need, everything we talked about today in the show notes. And I will say, too, one more time, I'll say it again for the people in the back. This show is listener supported, which means its existence, its continued existence, is solely based on those of you who are able to contribute financially. So this is this month's free drop. I give one a month because I really feel like this information is important and it needs to be out in the world, regardless of whether you can support it or not. So one a month is for everybody, but I'm releasing episodes throughout the month. So if you are interested in continuing to follow along, $5 a month or $44 a year, I believe it is. That's less than the cost of a Starbucks coffee. Heck, that is less than the cost of a Dunkin' Donuts coffee, if I'm being honest. And Dunkin' Donuts coffee isn't even good. I think this show is way better than Dunkin' Donuts coffee. But $4 to $5 a month will get you not only all my episodes ad-free, but it'll also support the show and support its message. So if that's something that's interesting to you, thank you for considering. You can always reach out if you need me. The ways to do that are in the show notes. And I thank you so much for being here. Thank you for holding environmental issues in your heart. And I'll see you soon. Take care.